So how did these Europeans in 400 BC, if Plato had knowledge beyond the Straits of Gibraltar that there was America, how did they lose this information? Well, you got to understand, after the fall of Rome, which is about 400 AD, what they have the Dark Ages from that period of 400 AD until 1492. What's important about 1492 is this right here. Hold on. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal, because it's not until this expulsion that you see that there is the ability to, or the knowledge again, to come across to Abar, to be a Hebrew, to come across, right, into these lands of America. And it says here, these were Jews that were expelled at this particular time from
adventures. The chapel is dedicated to Santa Maria de los Buenos Aires. Saint Mary of the Good Winds was the patron saint of navigators and a favorite of Columbus. This altar painting dates from shortly after Columbus died and features what's considered the first and most accurate portrait of the great explorer on the left. This altar painting dates from shortly after Columbus died and features what's considered the first and most accurate portrait of the great explorer on the left. It's also thought to be the first painting of Indians done in Europe.
Mother,
the Virgin's Cape
Jane,
seems to protect.
Sick, I don't spit, I vomit. Got it, 1 egg short of the omelet. Simon says, shoot a nigga in his thigh.
You have to understand, I'm a nut. And the door to the west, the Western Hemisphere, and the Iberian Peninsula, in that region of afar Africa. So when we look at the Black Madonna and Sun and the pilgrimages of the Black Madonna, so when we look at the West and the Western Hemisphere and the door of Amunet, the Black Madonna, the Virgin Mother, we have to look at the constellation of what is known as Virgo. When we connect Virgo and Virgin, and we see the significance of the constellation before Virgo, the Leo, and the July, right? The layer of Leo. So when we look at July, Leo, and Judah, in Genesis, it talks about the scepter not departing from Judah. You have to understand the mythology behind the mother and child, the material, the meson, the mother's light, and the Y chromosome, and the passing of inheritance through father to son.
So you see, it was in these slave markets that these Americans brought to the shores of Portugal and Spain were then titled to be Negroes, Indios, and a lot of these different color caste systems. Do you understand? It wasn't until they were placing these markers that you see the distinction placed upon trying to separate what is what.
The crossing merchants.
So as you see here, there's an actual fact there were many slaves from the Americas in Seville who never appeared notarized registers. It says Franco Sylvia has stated there were about 40 Americans in Seville in 1500s, but there could not have been more. Other evidence for the presence includes the following too. So when you look at the census of San Vicente of 1502, 2 females baptized. So you look at these records, this is how you go to find evidence and proof. Look at when you see these slaves being taken from the Americas, right? Look here, December 9, 1516, 88 slaves presented from the islands of Brazil, formerly pagans but now Christian, 3 Negroes. A Spaniard testified that all these had seen 23 Negroes and taken them to be buried. Thus the Brazilians were called Negroes. In 1216, Una Blanca Fresca, the islands of Brazil brought from Lisbon. So you see here, the Americans were categorized as whites, Lauros, Negroes, depending upon their perceived color. It is not seen any detailed data from Valencia, Spain between 1570. However, statistical summaries, data of Valencia, Spain between 15 and 69, however, show that new runaway slaves are available during the period new color terms appear.
and how
largely replacing laurel representing shades of brown. So understand how this crossing of taking from Brazil and the islands to Portugal says many Americans who were sent to the Spanish and Portuguese islands off the African coast that has developed from part of the Canary Islands during the 16th century, which shows that Americans presented throughout the period of 1525. 10% of the slaves sold were native of Canarios. So when you look at the slave registers for the market, who Negroes constituted 70% of the Moriscos. We understand Christian, right, Jews who had converted. A lot of these terms and a lot of what's taking place during this time, the conversion of the Jews to Catholicism is one of the main focal points during this time. So you understand the Moors who were teaching a lot of the teachings of Judaism, right, were expelled. So this is why you see the Jews and the Moors being expelled during this time of these conversions taking place here in these regions. So this is why the baptism records and a lot of these things are documented showing Negro being in these locations in Portugal. So when you look at the period of this time from 1631 to 1654, it says the Dutch in Brazil married Portuguese-speaking and native women, producing a new type of often blonde-haired. Many of these mixed families he stayed in Brazil, but others in 1654 fled to the West Indies. That's why I said it should be noted that the Dutch, like the Portuguese, sent civilians from Brazil to Africa in 1644, who were stonemasons, were taken from Brazil to Angola to help build forts, mulattoes, right? In this connection, it is interesting. J.A. Rogers refers to the tradition and ancestry in West Africa. The West African mulatto casts his own. The oldest group are Portuguese Brazilians that live chiefly in large towns in Porto Novo, Contudo, which is in, when you look at Wahida, Judah, and the taking of the Brazilians in the region of Judah into Africa, Angola.
So when we look at the Atlantic Ocean, Atlantic crossings, and these waters, even today when we look at modern fishing and the fishing licenses to fish in these different waters, the different treaties that took place after 1492 for the travels of these European nations is important. When you look at how through the expulsion of the Moorish Empire, they were able to come across.
So as early as 400 BC, some as early as Plato had knowledge that beyond the Pillar of Hercules, there existed a large continent, desert, island continent, some call it island continent, with other islands to the west of it. All right, you understand these other islands were also considered to be part of the New World, which we call the Australoid or Austronesian, the Melanesia, these Negroid type Negrito peoples that have been related to the Pygmies and the other most ancient found people of short stature, like the Negritos. But as early as 400 BC, we see that it's written by Europeans that they had knowledge of this.
So when we look at nation states today, such as China, and these different areas that deal with import and export across the seas, understand it's through our dehumanizing, our being placed in a minority status that has allowed for the Americas to control the trends and the setting of marketing and business throughout the world. We understand how they have done that in every empire that has existed, that has been documented historically, has had one thing in common: the captivity of control. This historically throughout every empire have existed.